The first issue featured Reza Shah on its front page, and the second carried a similarly large picture of the Crown Prince, both in full royal regalia. While the first issue gave no overt hint of the magazine's Nazi sentiments, beginning with the second issue, Iran-e-Bastan became increasingly aggressive and unabashed in its defense of Hitler and the Third Reich. In the second issue, for example, there is a picture of Hitler who is described as a strong man of firm ideas and a leader whose ideas are followed by millions of people. In later issues, the magazine became even more open in its advocacy of Nazi ideology. It often wrote to glorify the Aryan race and spoke of Iran's shared common legacy with Germany's Aryan Reich. After a few months, Iran-e-Bastan claimed it had a readership of more than 20,000, and its advocacy of Nazism became more pronounced. In its 14th issue, there were 4 pictures of Hitler, as an infant, with his father looking at his son in admiration, Hitler when he was a few months old, Hitler, and his dog, and finally Hitler showing affection to German laborers. A few weeks later, the front page of the magazine carried an image of the swastika, describing it as the symbol of Aryans and a banner of their liberation and happiness. Iran-e-Bastan regularly discussed National Socialism and its goal of cleansing the country of the material and spiritual influence of foreigners and Jews. The magazine continued to appear well into its second year when it suddenly folded. The discourse developed by the magazine helped shape the ideology of the Iranian Nazis, who became active again in the 40s and in the guise of new parties advocated proto-Nazi ideologies like extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, Aryan supremacy, and the cult of a Führer, Rabar. In 1936, at the time of his son's return from Europe, Reza Shah seemed intractably entrenched in power. The Crown Prince's return on May 11, 1936, even more than his departure, was greeted with much fanfare in the state-dominated media. Once again, Reza Shah and the royal family were on hand to greet the returning prince. While the Shah claimed in his 1961 memoir, Mission for My Country, that he had finished his course of studies at Le Rosey and was awarded his diploma before returning to Iran in 1936, Le Rosey School records dispute his claims. The records state that the Shah did not graduate in the school. His father took him back to Iran for political conveniences, where he finished his studies. They describe the Shah as a very good student and a great sportsman, football, swimming. Not long after returning to Tehran, the Crown Prince was placed in a class in the Officers' Academy, where he continued his education. But the real contentious issue between father and son was not whether he had finished high school. To Reza Shah's great dismay, the Crown Prince had come back with his newfound friend Ernest Perron. Aside from their experience in Switzerland, there was much that connected the unlikely friends. Perron was an incorrigible gossip-monger, and he rejoiced in gathering all the gossip and sharing it with his powerful friend. Another quality that possibly further endeared Perron to the Shah was his devout Catholicism. The Crown Prince must have felt particularly pressured by Reza Shah's determined irreligious disposition, and Perron offered him the solace and company of a man of religious fervor. In fact, the Shah claims that during his Switzerland journey, after a short respite, he returned to his faith and religion and started to recite the Muslim daily prayers. And I said them with real fervor and conviction. These revelations, made public in 1961 when he was on the verge of a major confrontation with the mullahs who opposed him, are as important for what they portend of his policies on religion as they are for the glimpses they offer into the habits and beliefs as a young man in Switzerland, away from the sway of his father and from the demands of his status as a crown prince. But their shared past and common proclivities could not convince Reza Shah that Peran should be allowed to stay near the crown prince. He banished him from the court, but not from the country. There are reports that on one occasion when Reza Shah accidentally ran into Peran, he went after him with the military staff he invariably carried. To keep Peran in Iran and away from Reza Shah's sight, he was given a job attending to the gardens of one of the hotels owned by Reza Shah. While Peran bided his time for an occasion to return to the center of power near his friend, Reza Shah chose a wife for his son. The task of finding the right future queen was once again delegated to Prime Minister Mohammad Jam. The crown prince himself was not involved in or even informed of the process. No stone was to be left unturned, Jam was told, in finding the most suitable candidate. Many Iranian families considered their daughters eligible and worked hard behind the scenes to influence the selection process. Ultimately, royal families of other countries, particularly the Muslim world, were also scouted. The most eligible candidates were the two sisters of King Farouk of Egypt, Faiz and Fazia. A new Iranian ambassador to Egypt was named, and his special mandate was to further inquire into the character of the bride-to-be and ascertain the wisdom of marriage. Once in Egypt, the new ambassador clumsily broached the idea with the Egyptian prime minister, who summarily dismissed it. The marriage of Sunni princess to a Shiite prince, he declared, is a recipe for disaster. When told about this rejection, Reza Shah was incensed. He felt the ambassador had mishandled the situation, and he recalled him. A new ambassador was dispatched to Cairo, and the mandate of arranging the betrothal of an Egyptian princess to the crown prince. On the main qualifications the wife-to-be had to have was being well versed in the ways of royalty. In Egypt, the new ambassador found a way of endearing himself and his wife to members of the Egyptian royal family. Once assured of King Farouk's friendship, he finally raised the idea of a wedding that would join the royal families of Iran and Egypt. By then, Reza Shah had settled on Fazia as the more suitable of the two Egyptian princesses. In the meantime, as Reza Shah and his prime minister were fast at work in finding a suitable wife for the future king, the crown prince was himself, by his own admission, altogether unaware of these efforts. He learned about them only when they bore fruit. Once apprised of the good news that King Farouk had agreed to at least begin talks on an Egypto-Iranian union, Reza Shah was overjoyed. He picked a committee that was to go to Egypt and follow a long tradition in Islamic societies, asked for the hand of Princess Fazia for Iran's crown prince. Fazia was the oldest of King Farouk's four sisters. She was 17 at the time the marriage was first proposed. She had lived her young life within the walled palaces and gardens of Cairo and Alexandria, Abdin, Kuba, and Montaza. In 1938, these palaces were the playgrounds of her family. 4 decades later, some of the same palaces would be the last refuge for the pariah Shah. Fazia was once described as a supremely naive, overprotected, cellophane-wrapped, gift-packaged little girl living in bucolic surroundings, mobbed by adoring servants, aunts, ladies-in-waiting. Before long, Jam received a telegram from Egypt. Though beridden and Burning with a high fever, he immediately set out for the court, where he told Reza Shah that Farooq had agreed to the royal matrimony, predicated on his sister's approval. At the same time, he had consulted with religious authorities to ensure that the marriage did not represent any insurmountable theological obstacle. She was, after all, a Sunni princess set to marry a prince of a Shiite nation. Assured of approval of the clerics, the only remaining obstacle was the approval of the princess, and before long she too consented. The committee left for Egypt, taking with them a letter from Reza Shah to King Farooq and a large collection of fine gifts: diamond necklace, diamond brooch, diamond earrings. But the Egyptians were far from impressed. In fact, they made a point of taking the Iranian delegation to the royal family's many palaces and their 1,001 night splendor, their hundreds of bedrooms with golden faucets and golden beds, to show their wealth to the Iranian delegation. Still, before long, agreements were reached for a wedding, and on May 26, 1938, the Iranian and Egyptian courts simultaneously issued a communique announcing the engagement of Iran's crown prince to Princess Fawzia. A tutor was assigned to teach the future queen of Iran the Persian language. When she finally settled in Iran, she was something of a polyglot, speaking Arabic and French fluently and Persian competently, but with a hint of an accent. To bypass the constitutional requirement that only an Iranian citizen could be queen, a parliamentary bill was hurriedly passed declaring her Iranian born. In describing why his father had chosen Fawzia, the Shah felt that his father had two goals. He wanted someone from a good family, and he wanted to connect the Pahlavi family to another royal family. An understandable undertone of bitterness is evident in the Shah's description of the process leading to his marriage. "I don't think anyone will criticize me," he wrote, "if I say that a king must have as much freedom about his private life as a simple peasant. He suggests that in every civilized society, family relations are considered part of the private domain, and free from outside interference, and all I wanted was the same right for myself." He makes these critical comments a few paragraphs away from the lines where he describes with prescribed joy his first marriage, before being told that he must go to Egypt and meet his future wife. He had never even seen a picture of her. The crown prince learned of his engagement to Princess Fawzia on the same day that his nation was informed. In March 1939, the crown prince set out for Egypt to meet and marry his future wife and officially celebrate their wedding. From Tehran, he flew to Beirut, where he arrived on March 1, 1939, and immediately boarded the royal yacht Mashruza, one of Khedive Ismail's extravagant mementos of modernity, finished in late Victorian splendor. In 1939, the Mashruza carried the Iranian crown prince to Egypt. Less than a quarter century later, King Farouk would use the same yacht to leave his country after a coup toppled his increasingly corrupt and sclerotic regime. The storied boat carried the groom-to-be to Alexandria with two Egyptian cruisers escorting the Egyptian planes flying over as it neared its destination. There, the Iranian wedding party boarded the royal train for Cairo, where there was a gala to celebrate the engagement at the Abdin Palace. At 11 o'clock on the morning of March 15, the official wedding ceremonies were conducted. While the crown prince was in Egypt, the semi-official daily paper Al-Ibram carried a picture of him and his bride on the front page virtually every day. Those were also the days when the Second World War was beginning, and every happy piece of news about the wedding was invariably accompanied on the same page with a report of some ominous development in Europe. In the meantime, the Crown Prince visited a number of historic places. Some, like Al Azhar University, considered the oldest university in the world, and some, like the pyramids, considered one of the wonders of the world. The contrast between the splendor of the Egyptian royal family, with their corpulent but melancholy king, their fez-hatted ministers, their liveried servants, and forlorn Iranian crown prince, often in a simple military uniform, heralded a marriage marred from its inception by widely differing sensibilities and aesthetic values. On November 2nd, 1939, the royal couple returned to Iran, where they were afforded a welcome befitting the grandeur they had seen in Egypt. Many parties celebrated the wedding, this time in Iranian style. The streets of Tehran were dotted with elaborately decorated arches and banners welcoming the royal couple back to Iran. The crown prince and his bride settled in a palace that was surely, in comparison with the princess's Egyptian place of abode, meager. Let's read that again. The crown prince and his bride settled in a palace that was surely, in comparison with the princess's Egyptian places of abode, meager. But their biggest problems were not rooted in magnitudes of architectural grandeur. The constant intrusions of some of the Shah's siblings and domineering mother, stories of the newly married grooms philandering, and finally the ever nearer menace of war combined to make the newlyweds' life increasingly fraught with tension. That season, in Tehran's otherwise anemic social scene, the most coveted sign of power and connection was an invitation to the Iranian wedding ceremony. There was a big celebration arranged in the Ajedameye Stadium with a capacity of 25,000 tickets. To the event were reserved for those in the highest escalons of power. Tehran was abuzz with talk of the European glamour of the future queen and the petty jealousies already evident among the crown prince's siblings. Fawzia was the new maven of fashion. The stadium wedding was long on many sports, and short on arts and dances. It began with the playing of the two countries' national anthems, followed by synchronized acrobatics by students, always a favorite of authoritarian societies, who used this synchronicity as a metaphor for social efficiency and harmony. It was followed by traditional Iranian calisthenics, bastane, with half-naked men of heavy muscular build playing with dumbbells, followed by fencing, football, a bevy of Boy Scouts exhibiting tropes and tricks they had mastered, and finally a recessional singing the national anthems of the two countries. Dinner was a more formal affair, in everything from the attire to the menu. Caviar from the Caspian Sea, followed by consommé royal and a variety of fish, fowl, and lamb. Fruit and jelly were served for dessert. Princess Fawzia's large entourage were all present, and by all accounts she looked as glamorous as her elegant reputation demanded. Not long after his marriage, the crown prince and his adenoids had his adenoids successfully removed. Just before the operation, Tehran was ripe with rumors of the arrest of about 12 officers charged with espionage on behalf of the Soviet Union. Others talked of a plot to kill the king. So worried was the government about regicide that no films were ever passed by the censors which contained scenes of an assassination plot against a crowned head. In this atmosphere of intrigue, the crown prince insisted on the surgeons removing their face masks, lest there be someone with mischief on his mind. A few weeks after the wedding in 1940, Tehran had its first scientifically conducted census. At the beginning of the 1940s, the population of the city was 531,246, more than double the estimated population at the time of the foundation of the Pahlavi dynasty. But while Reza Shah and his crown prince were busy with wedding plans, Nazi Germany was expanding its European war into global mayhem. The government of Iran declared its neutrality, something Iran had underscored many times before. But threatening clouds were clearly on the horizon, and Reza Shah and his son both knew it, though some embassies reported at the time that after his marriage the crown prince appears to have somewhat lost the full confidence of his father. Every indication is, in fact, that with every passing day Reza Shah involved his designated successor more and more in matters of state. At the same time, in a meeting with members of the parliament, Reza Shah ominously stated that though they were relying on the correct policy of neutrality, this is not enough. We must prepare for harder days. This meeting is primarily for me to register my dismay at the work of the government. They keep telling us, Your Majesty's mind can rest assured. But when we look at how things actually are, we realize that we can be anything but assured.